Welcome back to episode 246 of the Tall Boy Radio Podcast. And as we always say, who knows where it goes when the beer flows? Well, it's flowing in a very interesting direction tonight. Something we're going to be talking about that maybe we don't know an awful lot about. So hopefully we'll be learning something, and hopefully you will be too. Gaz, I'm sure you have something to add to this subject matter. Would that be correct?
Well, we'll find out, won't we? Evening all, evening the world. Hope everybody is okay wherever it is that you are tuning in to. And I say, Adam has sort of teed it up a little bit. It's an episode that no doubt will be educational. I'm looking forward to learning a few things, and it's always great when we have guests on. And one guest who we have had on before, and one guest who is new to us. So it's always great when we do have new guests. So looking forward to where it's going.
Indeed, indeed. David, is this a topic that you're familiar with?
Superficially, but not significantly. And any topic that has words that are difficult to spell, you know it's going to be educational. But I think it's beneficial for people in general, but also from a work perspective. I think I'm going to pick up some insights and some useful stuff along the way.
100%, yeah, 100%. I spoke to Victoria, we'll introduce shortly, earlier in the week. It might have been last week, I forget. And yeah, exactly the same thing. I thought, in terms of, it's one of the episodes I really had to look into before, because I definitely don't know enough stuff I'm going to need to know for myself. And like you say, maybe from a work basis and just for the people around you, it's beneficial if you have this information. So before we get to Toby, who's been on before, Victoria, did you want to say hello and tell us a little bit about what you're going to be talking about tonight?
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, so I'm Victoria. I'm a registered nurse and I run my own business, Victoria Howell Menopause Services. So I see people clinically, so in my clinic, but also I run the staff clinic for NHS, Kingston, Hounslow and Richmond Foundation Trust, which I think is really good because it shows that they're looking after their staff. I do some for Holland and Barrett and I do some locally. In addition to that, I do a lot of corporate work and I have accredited training programs. So I have the accredited menopause champion program, accredited menopause training for managers and just general menopause awareness. So yeah, I'm just here to have a good chat about menopause. And I think when we spoke, I can't remember if it was earlier this week or last week, Adam, but we had a good chat and you were kindly spoke to me on your day off. And I think you may have regretted that because I just started going on passionately, like, as Toby knows that I do as well.
Oh, no, that's good. That's good. I enjoy people who are passionate about the things that they want to talk about. But like you say, the menopause, something I don't know enough about, and certainly sounds from your introduction there that you do know plenty about. But like you said, we do need to introduce Toby as well. Toby joined the podcast before to talk about midlife crisis, not his own, I can assure you. He's a young fella, a young whippersnapper, and he's flown in from the States to be here tonight. Toby, how are you doing?
I'm very well, folks. Yeah, I'm good. A little bit jet lagged, as I said in the build up, but apart from that, I am alive, kicking, and ready to go for some awesome chat.
There you go. There you go. And thank you, Toby, for setting this up, because I do know it was yourself who suggested it. So, Victoria, then. So, like you said, you are a bit of an expert in this field. Do you want to kick us off by, first of all, giving us some indication? Because I think, we when we spoke about the differences between the menopause and the andropause, and we'll get to those a little bit later. But, one of the things you said was the similarities. Now, in terms of the menopause, we'll start talking about that first. Do you want to tell us, literally when you would expect to be experiencing that in your lifetime? How it varies for people and that kind of stuff. Just the basics, just to introduce
Okay.
anyone.
Okay, so the average age of menopause. So menopause itself is literally 1 day. Okay. This is for a natural menopause. It's 1 day. So it's 12 months after their last menstrual period. So you're not going to know until a year's down. But it's obviously this umbrella term that we use for perimenopause and postmenopause. So the average age is between 45 and 55, circa 51. There's also an early menopause, which is between the ages of 40 to 44. Prior to that, it can happen, and we call that POI, that's premature ovarian insufficiency, and that can occur from very, very young, so like 12 up until 39. The symptoms, there are lots of symptoms, and there's sort of more being discovered and added to the list all the time. But you have what we call your psychological and emotional symptoms. So when we start sort of forgetting words, we may forget what we're saying, when we're just chatting away. Things like low mood, not feeling ourselves anymore, the loss of joy. Some people I've met, they've sort of used to love going out and feeling really excited about stuff when they went out with their friends. I think it was something like ABBA or something like that. Their friends were really raving about it, but the other person was just like, yeah, that was nice, that was okay. That loss of joy goes, and it's all to do not just with the levels of estrogen fluctuating, it's to do with other hormones that come into play with estrogen. So I'm trying not to ramble on too much here.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. And we just do also need to say good evening, Lee from the Boo Brothers, who stopped by to say hello. Thank you for watching. Yeah, so in terms of that, though, so when you look at that sort of age span, I think when you're looking at loss of memory, gee whiz, sounds like Davey's been having the menopause for the last 35 years. As long as I've known him, he's not been able to remember a damn thing. But in all seriousness, though, so that sort of age group, sort of 51 years old, he's saying is the average. That's I know 3 folks who are in that age bracket right about now. So it's likely to affect people in our close circles, I think it's fair to say. So just out of interest, guys, do you have any sort of, you work within, you work within teaching, don't you? So
in education, yeah.
So you're going to be working with people within that sort of age, but I'm not asking you to name them.
Yeah.
But, do you have any level of experience on a professional level, Emily?
I mean, obviously we have staff that have gone through it. It's not something, if I'm honest, it's not something that necessarily comes in terms of conversation. I haven't currently got anybody that I know is going through it, and we've had that conversation. So yes, we are going through it. No, I'm not aware of anybody currently that is, if that makes sense. So I'm in a I say relatively fortunate stroke unfortunate position. I'm married to a GP, so if there is any sort of conversations around this topic, my wife is let's say is pretty genned up on it, as they say. So I say, I think from a professional point of view, and you have to be aware of it. It's not something, I think years ago, it's like most things, I suppose, recently, the awareness of it has started to increase, I suppose. So therefore, it's not something that historically, and I'll get to a question I've got for you in a minute, Victoria, but it's not one of those things that maybe historically people just used to brush off and not really understand it. Whereas I think now there's much more understanding of the symptoms and understanding of the condition itself, and therefore, like all of us in we're all in professional positions. So I think just having a raised awareness of it means that you're probably then in a better position to deal with it from a professional point of view. So that was a long answer. Short answer, no, not specifically. But I have, like I say, I have got ladies that have gone through it.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Just for the record there, Victoria, there's a good example. You don't need to worry about rambling on. Sorry, I couldn't resist. So in terms of that, then we spoke about there's the menopause there, and obviously the other one I mentioned, the other one that I had to Google definitely how to spell it, was the andropause. So
That's right.
do you want to tell us a little bit about that as well, because that's something that the 3 of us may or may not experience.
Absolutely. So there is so much more awareness, as you're saying. So many more people are talking about it now, but men are trying to muzzle in. They're saying about the male menopause. And as I said to you, there's no such thing as the male menopause because a male was not born with a uterus. So you cannot go into menopause. However, there is andropause. Now, clearly not everybody goes through this. But the andropause can occur between the ages of 40 to 50, circa that. And the symptoms can be quite similar to the menopause. So reduced concentration, quite extreme fatigue, erectile dysfunction, low libido, and just as I say, feeling very tired all the time, that lacking of energy and not feeling great about themselves. And a lot of time people say, well, it must be due to testosterone, but males with their testosterone, they're actually only losing it as the 1% each year. So whereas with estrogen, women are cyclic, so that there's big fluctuations, which obviously with those fluctuations, if you have any spikes or dips with the estrogen, that's when the symptoms become more prolific.
That's interesting. Now, I must admit, I had read up a little bit off of the back of this about testosterone, and I don't know about you, but or yourself, David. I know you're not a big fan of social media, but I get a lot of adverts. Don't know why for testosterone replacement all the time. Don't know why it's that. I also get a lot of adverts for life insurance for people specifically over the age of 51 as well. But yeah, what about yourself, David? Is it something you're aware of? This, your testosterone deficiency? Not you personally, but in general.
No, I'd not heard of it at all until this episode was being mooted. But I mean, it's no secret that I've been suffering from fatigue issues for nearly a year. Although I think that it's currently going through a long COVID clinic, and it started by having COVID and then sinusitis and some other things. So looking through the quick list of criteria, I don't think it would tick those boxes, but there are some similarities. So if you're going through those kind of things, I can see how it can trip from physical to mental, and then can lead to the other issues that are the emotional and the anxieties and the depression and everything else that can come from those physical changes. So no, I wasn't aware of it, but I mean, a very quick look at the list as we've been talking, I can see how those things can align and cause problems down the line, and can just get worse and worse, I guess, if you don't do something about it. And I suppose that's a question, is what can you do about it, from whether it's the menopause or the other one, which I've forgotten.
The andropause.
What was saying about memory earlier?
Yeah, there's a few early signals there.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
So for yourself, Toby, to be fair to you, it was your idea to do this episode. David forwarded on the message that you sent. So what was it? I mean, obviously, given what you were talking about, I can understand the link there. But what was it that you thought was important to talk about then tonight?
Well, I suppose, yeah, we were talking about midlife crisis, right? And we kind of talked about some of the physiology that sat around that. And then we kind of just naturally got talking about people of a certain age, present company included, I must say, but there we go. But I met Victoria, I think January of last year at an event called Disrupt HR in Norwich. And you might be thinking, what does that got to do with the menopause? But Victoria was there kind of speaking about the menopause. And at that time, I had pretty much zero idea, even though my mum's been through it and all that kind of stuff. I kind of moved out just as that started, so I didn't really see or hear any of it. But what did happen at a similar time to me meeting Victoria was one of my colleagues and very good friends had an operation due to a cancer risk, which created early onset menopause at the age, a similar age as me. Actually, I better take that back. She's 1 year younger than me. She'll hold it against me if I say she's the same age. So yeah, as a 36-year-old female who I worked with and was friends with, all of a sudden they were going through some pretty hefty physiological changes. And it also transpired at the time, as a company of 8 people, another woman was going through the menopause as well, but because of more natural causes. So at that time, those 2 conversations happened with my colleagues, and I'd met Victoria. And so I was like, okay, this is interesting. Like, okay, these 2 people are going through the menopause. What does that even mean? Because they have felt compelled enough to have a conversation with me about it. But realistically, I didn't necessarily have any idea about what to do with that information. So over the past year and a half, I've talked with more about Victoria, trying to understand menopause and andropause as well, which I wasn't aware of until about a month and a half ago when we met for a coffee. But ultimately, one of the changes that Victoria signaled in my career was, at that time, I went to the leadership of the company and said, look, we're a company of 8 people. 2 of them go through the menopause. This is fundamentally going to change how they come to work. Concentration, fatigue, all this kind of stuff is going to mean they are different in the workplace. So we have to do something. We have to educate ourselves as a business, albeit a small one, to act differently. And what I was met with was complete inaction. And that annoyed me, so I left and started a company that helped companies design great employee experiences that take into factors such as menopause, andropause, and the things that genuinely have an impact on people's life at work, rather than just kind of arbitrary internal communications and training. Actually, what can we do as employers to make sure that people in the workplace get what they need? And Victoria kind of set me off on that journey, menopause and andropause being one of them, but a whole other facet of stuff. But yeah, it was Victoria that started all that, so I've got her to blame.
Fair play to you, dude. I mean, fair play, and well done for speaking out on that. Well, it's an interesting point then. So, in terms of from a business perspective, Dave being a man of business, Gaz, obviously, well as being a teacher, you are part of the management structure of the school, so it's something that you need to know. And for myself, I work for a rather larger organisation. I work, my department has around 20 people in it, but there's probably, I think my company employs somewhere around about 7 or 8, maybe even 9,000 people. So it's a bit of a behemoth of a company. So in terms of those different experiences, what do we need to know then about this sort of about what we should expect and what our employees should expect from their journey through work?
I think if we look at some stats, yes, we know Davina and other celebrities have raised their profile, so many more women are aware of it. We're talking about it a lot more. Women know their rights. There's been a big increase. There was a 44% increase in tribunal cases citing menopause as a reason for unfair dismissal, harassment, etc. And this costs the economy a lot of money. There is 14 million working days lost each year due to menopause, and that's costing the economy circa 31 billion pounds annually. So that's up there with back pain and anxiety. However, there was a piece of research done by the Police Federation of England and Wales in 2018 on, their nationwide staff. 44% of those respondents didn't share the reason they were off was to do with the menopause for whatever reason. So I fear with more research, with more widespread research, that actual figure could potentially be a lot more. So there have been 3 last year tribunals. One was a social worker. She took her county council to the tribunal for unfair dismissal. She's also got the Equality in Human Rights. My brain is a bit frazzled here, so if I haven't quoted that organisation 100%, forgive me. She's got them backing her. There was another lady who had worked for her organisation since the mid-90s, and she started suffering, concentration, sweats, and her boss, who had been her boss for all that time, basically said he's sick of hearing about the menopause. All she does is go on about the menopause. So she was let go, and she successfully took them to the tribunal. And the most recent one that I'm aware of is Miss Linsky versus Direct Line. She had worked for her company for some years. She was a very good worker. She enjoyed working there, and she had menopause symptoms. So she went to her GP. She had a great manager, so she was very open about this, and so they supported her. A few months later, she was off again, and so what her manager did, they gave her some coaching, they gave her support, and basically they offered her a different position. So she took the different position, and it started off okay, but her symptoms were progressing, and she ended up having another chat with her manager, talking about her conduct, which she agreed with. And she went off with long-term stress and anxiety, and she took them to tribunal for constructive dismissal. And when you start reading this, because it's available in the public domain, when you start reading this, you can see they did a lot. The company did a lot for her. The thing that they hadn't done, they hadn't taken into consideration the occupational health report that said that her symptoms amounted to a disability under the Equality Act. So this is why she won the tribunal. So by having menopause education in the workplace, is mandatory at every level, having a good policy in place, not just having a policy in place and letting it, gather dust. It's like having that policy in place. What does that policy look like? How are we going to have that support visible to people when they want it? Who can they go to? Have you got menopause champions in the organization that they can go and talk to? They may not feel comfortable going to the manager, so people can be signposted. But think about occupational health as well. So yeah, there's a huge amount that we can do in the workplace, and by providing this education, we can then hopefully mitigate the risk of costly tribunals.
Wow. I mean, I don't know about you, but I hadn't realized that, it could impact your ability to do your job as much. Like I say, to the point where this lady was, technically, covered by the Disability Act. So, I mean, in terms of, it can't affect everybody the same, can it? People will have different experiences, won't they?
Absolutely. Some people, they may have one or two symptoms that don't really impact on their day-to-day living. They may notice it a little bit. They may get more tired. They may get a little bit more anxious. They may have a few sweats or joint pain. I could go on with the symptoms, but we haven't got all night. But with some people, they really do suffer, and it does impact on their ability to do their day-to-day living. So this is why when the perimenopause, people are still having regular periods. So I'll give a new example here. Regular periods, and their pre-period symptoms may be something like a migraine or anxiety or getting a bit irritable. When they're going through the perimenopause, because the hormones are fluctuating so much, those symptoms can be more severe, and they may, instead of lasting one day before a period, say a migraine, take a tablet, carry on with work. That migraine may not be alleviated by the medication. That person may be feeling really nauseous and sick and dizzy, so they have to have a couple of days off work. So that you can see how, if that's occurring each month, you can see how that's going to impact on their sickness and their performance, and how they can potentially go down a slippery slope. And again, I'll put that back to, we need awareness and support in the workplace. So that's just the perimenopause. And a lot of people, they don't understand, because they're still having periods, that is the perimenopause. That could be the start of it, you see. So yeah, but some people have given up work prematurely. I know many professional women who now late 50s, early 60s, when they're now aware of the menopause and what the symptoms are, they're reflecting back and said, well, that's clearly what I had. If I'd have known that then, if I'd have known how to get the support then, I may have still been at work. So I think it's up to 1 million women sort of considering leaving work prematurely.
Wow. I mean, that's a lot, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Would it be right to say that, particularly with the perimenopausal, that there's a lot of women that don't actually know themselves what's going on? So in terms of having that education in the workplace, it's not just for how to deal with it and how to better respond and to make the working conditions more easier for that person, to accommodate them. And I was trying to avoid the word accommodate. It didn't quite sound right, but that's to create an environment where they can still fulfill their role. There's still going to be, I guess, particularly in early perimenopausal, where there's women that don't even know that's what's going on themselves. So with having those trained people, it allows you to identify that and provide support, really early on.
Absolutely. And you know what? The symptoms of menopause can be similar to other conditions as well, such as people with like thyroid issues, for example. The symptoms are the same. Fibromyalgia, they can be very similar. Long COVID, they can be very similar, you know. So this is why that understanding and knowing how to get the right clinical support as well, because there is something like 9.3 million pounds wasted each year on unnecessary blood tests to determine if an individual is perimenopausal or not. We do the blood test up to the age of 44. However, as I said, estrogen is fluctuating, FSH levels are fluctuating. So if we were to have a blood test one day and it would come back and say, no, the levels are fine, you're not perimenopausal. The next day it may say yes. So a lot of people are having blood tests and they're told, no, the blood tests are fine. And they think, well, I can't be perimenopausal because my blood test was fine. So this is why we tend to diagnose clinically via those symptoms and history taking as well.
All right. So in terms of timescales then, so we sort of said perimenopause obviously is the 12 months leading up to that sort of singular day of menopause. So how long then, and I'm going to guess this one probably differs from person to person, does the postmenopause last?
Say that, how long does the postmenopause last?
Yeah.
For the rest of their lives.
Oh, wow. Wasn't
Because
expecting that.
postmenopause is just a stage, okay? Let's go back to when we're a child, a female child. When we have our first period, clinically we are classed as premenopausal. Now we don't talk about that, do we? Because we don't need to. But this is how it is clinically. So the perimenopause can, some people be a few months. For some people it can be 10, 15 years. It depends on their journey. Doesn't mean to say they're going to be suffering all that time. Okay, they may just be more aware of their cycle and the changes. So the menopause itself, as I said, is one day. After that day, an individual is postmenopausal, and it's just a classification, if you like. Not some people. Sorry.
No. I was just going to ask if you are post-menopausal, then some people that are listening to this might then make an assumption that you have a range of symptoms, and then you're perimenopausal, then leading up to that one singular day, and then after that, hey ho, we're symptom free, and obviously it doesn't quite work like that. So when you become post-menopausal, then how long would the symptoms I mean, would that be forever ad infinitum sort of thing, or is there a period of time that maybe the symptoms would perhaps sort of start to drop off?
Do you know what? There is not one answer for that because it is so individualized.
Yeah.
Some people don't have any symptoms. You know, they still, when they're leading up to that 1 year, they may have, you know, had a real decline in symptoms and feel much better anyway. Some women are still having hot flushes in their 60s or 70s. So it's all very different. It's you cannot quantify you will stop having symptoms on X day because everybody's so different.
So again, excuse my ignorance on this. So when lots of ladies of a certain age say, I'm going through the menopause as such, what they're actually saying is that the perimenopause that they're going through, because it's the 12 months leading up to the point at which they then haven't, they have that singular day. So it's 12 months prior to that. So when they're leading up to that, they'll say that they're going through the menopause, but actually it's the perimenopause. Would that be right in saying?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting. To be honest with you, like I said, you know, when I spoke to you, I've done a fair bit of research on this one because it's not something I know an awful lot about. But I'm learning stuff just even based on, you know, based further from the research which I've done. So just taking you back then when you were talking about sort of the legal protection for people who are experiencing the menopause, is there the same protection for men experiencing the andropause?
Not that I'm aware of.
No, I kind of suspected that might be the case. I don't know why.
And I don't know, and it might go back to this raising awareness of the sort of the andropause and how that could affect men. But maybe they would then attribute their symptoms to then something else, or because it's not widely known, or if I start to have a couple of the symptoms, I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, I might now after this episode, and that's great for raising awareness, but I wouldn't necessarily think I've got the andropause. I might think I've got something else, if that makes sense, and just attribute those symptoms to that something else. And I don't know whether that's it, or is it just? I mean, Toby might be able to sort of chime in here. Is it just I suppose, a lack of awareness, or a lack of sort of owners and businessmen and industry just not being aware?
Well,
I think it's also, sorry, I was just going to jump in. I think it's also the lack of research around andropause as well. Carry on, Toby. Sorry.
No, I think most of it boils down to legislation, right? So within the HR world, you have a certain number of protected characteristics which are protected by law: race, gender, age, all of these things. You know, the anti-discrimination of those in the workplace are protected by law. Now, when it comes to menopause, and I can't remember if this has or is changing, Victoria, but essentially, historically, menopause hasn't been a protected characteristic. So that's where, when Victoria talks about pointing at the Disability Act, well, actually, it shouldn't have ever got to that stage where you have to point at the Disability Act. You should be able to point at the Menopause Act and say you can't discriminate on behalf of conditions related to the menopause. So what organizations tend to do is they act as a result of a legal implication. So we have a more diverse workforce in terms of race, gender, and age because the law requires it. But the law doesn't require you at the moment to act in a certain way when it comes to menopause, which is fundamentally wrong. But from a moral obligation as a company owner or leader, or anybody, it's kind of on your own head to create your own awareness and create your own action as a result. The other thing I would say as well is, regardless of what the protected characteristic is, menopause or otherwise, is that most of this relies on your ability to have a great conversation with your employee. So, as you've said, right, someone may not identify as having the menopause. They might just, or perimenopausal. They might just not know. So, having an open conversation where it can be discussed, at least, it might be, it might not be, and then all those other protected characteristics. All of a sudden, you start creating these hugely different workplaces, which ultimately means your employees are more productive, engaged, and the company makes more money, realistically. But at a human level, you're doing way more for your people then as a member of society, rather than just going, right, come in and do a service and I'll give you some money for it. Actually, how can I help you have the very best life, and therefore you give me the very best service as an employer as a result? But in short, at the moment, most of that stuff is protected by law, not by a moral obligation.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a very good point you just made there. Very good point indeed. Yeah. So on a personal level then, sort of taking it back to a personal level. So we've got people who are experiencing the hot flashes, etc., etc., etc. Is there anything that they can do to help them? So one of the things I know we talked about when we spoke, whenever it was, but that we spoke, and obviously hormone replacement therapy is probably the one thing that most people think of when they think about the menopause. But is there anything else you can do? Is there any dietary changes that you can make that will help with these matters?
Yeah, well, we need to sort of be considering lifestyle factors lifelong. So, and a lot of the time people are working full time, they may have young children, they may have older children, they may have older parents to look after, and they may be absolutely exhausted. So self-care may not be top of their priority. They may not be eating the most nutritious food. They may not have very good strategies to reduce levels of stress. So obviously cortisol levels, noradrenaline can be going through their bodies. So lifestyle factors, and it's about changing things slowly rather than saying, oh, I should be doing this, and this, making this huge thing for them to do and then feeling that it's overwhelming, that they can't actually achieve any of that, and then they feel like a failure. So yeah, what they recommend is something such as a Mediterranean diet, so your fresh fruit and veg, your oily fish, beans, pulses, etc. But again, it's so individualized because some people are unable to follow that diet if they have particular allergies or if they have any inflammatory bowel conditions, all these different things. So, yeah, lifestyle factors are huge. Complementary therapies. Be careful with herbal supplements and supplements that are out there. There are so many aimed at, we can be a vulnerable market, okay? So many things aimed at perimenopausal women or postmenopausal women. You can go in most shops now and there's a big box of this or a small box of this with really high price tags. Some people think if it's natural that it's going to be healthier for them. There are some herbal supplements. They're not first of all, they're not regulated in the same way. Okay, so for example, you may buy a pot of ashwagandha, for example, and they may say 500 micrograms per capsule. Because they're not regulated, you don't know how much is in per capsule. There may be 500 in one, there may be 150, there may be 5. So if people are going for that, they have to look for something with the THR logo. The other thing is, if people are on other medication or have specific health conditions, some of these herbal supplements can interact with medication and make the person unwell. And also it can interact with actual health conditions that they have. So it's very much, it has to be individual choice. What I recommend all women do is know how to get safe evidence-based information. So one central place people can go to is the Women's Health Concern website. The Women's Health Concern is the public arm of the British Menopause Society. So all their fact sheets are safe evidence-based information, and they have a fact sheet on just about everything to do with menopause, because people can Google and they can spend 3 or 4 hours looking for support through the menopause, and there's so much misinformation out there. And after those few hours, they may have spent a fortune and they'd be feeling exhausted, but also really confused about, well, that place said that and that one said that. Which one do I believe? So it's about knowing how to access safe evidence-based information.
I mean, it's a good point. It sort of leaves me wondering, you know, like I say, I'm 51 now. I know you're looking at me thinking I'm probably 25, but let's get that myth out of our minds. I am 51. So, you know, and Dave and Gaz, both older than me, just to be clear, but are in the same boat. And why? I don't know why they're shaking their heads. It's true, but I don't. How do we get to this stage in our lives and not have this information sort of presented to us? You know, it shouldn't be something that, you know, when you start wondering yourself, well, where do I get this information?
Yeah.
How do I get this information? And how can I trust the information that I'm given?
Well, we're all learning all the time, aren't we? There's more research coming out all the time. There's still certainly not enough research done in women's health, for sure. There's less than 2% spent on women's health research in the UK. So we still do have a long way to go. But I think we're progressing all the time, aren't we? We are learning more since we've had, you know, the internet. We've been able to access far more information. Yes, it is about gaining the correct information. But we are talking about it. We have social media. There are a lot of people on social media who are very good at influencing, and they have a lot of followers. So they'll talk about things. They'll have experts come on and talk to them, which is really good. So I think we're being spoon-fed it in multiple areas nowadays. But when you think, even like 15 years ago, we didn't have the access to a lot of the information that we do these days.
I think it's a societal thing as well, isn't it? You know, we are generally quite reserved, and you know, we've seen just recently in you know, the last 7, 8, 9, 10 years, big changes in the way that people talk. You know, men's mental health is one. Just periods in girls going through that, and now periods are just normal. They're nothing to be ashamed of or to hide or to not talk about. And menopause is just another one you can add to that list. And I think it seems to me that it seems to be accelerating, in that the more things you add to the, I don't know if taboo is the right word, but if you didn't talk about it before, it might be because of lack of knowledge, or it might just be taboo. The more we talk about more things, the more get added to that list.
Yeah, Yeah, it's interesting. That what were you going to say? Sorry, guys.
No, it's probably something similar to Dave. Then I think, you know, Dave mentioned then the increase in the awareness of men's health and particularly mental health, but then more specifically men's mental health. And I think Dave's right. You know, the increase in awareness over the last, I would say, 5 years, 10 years, really, it is quite significant. And actually, it is okay to talk. And I know there was that "it's good to talk" so thing. That was a slogan for a different thing, but it is good to talk. And I think the more people that are out there that are happy to have those conversations, and Toby mentioned it in terms of if you are an employer, you know, if you are in a position that you can provide those opportunities to talk for your employees, whether that be to you as an employer or even just a staff employee group or some sort of well-being group within your workforce, you know, providing those opportunities, A, is significant, and B, I sort of get the sense is actually on the increase, and many more companies are now providing things, you know, like your health shield benefits and that, and access to helplines, and providing a lot more opportunity at the, I suppose, at the induction phase, for want of a better phrase, is actually, if you do need these things, here are some places that you can go to. Here are some websites you can access. Here are some helplines you can ring. Here is, whether it be the occupational health or whatever, but here are some self-help groups, you know. So I think the whole society thing is on the increase in terms of raising the awareness of that, and that can only be a good thing moving forward.
I think there's another thing as well, is that when you look at, particularly in the workplace, if you want people to be better or be more engaged with their work, training is usually the answer, because it's like, oh, I can pay some money for someone to learn this and they'll act differently. That's kind of the heart of it. And apologies if you can hear the tip tapping. The storm has just arrived here. To pay some money to get people to change through training. But ultimately, when you look at people acting behavior at work, what they want is an equitable relationship between an employee-employer, and equitable not just in terms of monetary value, but in terms of the relationship and how I come and show up to work. And therefore, actually, when you put it through that lens, training becomes not you know, irrelevant, but way less necessary, because actually, you know, what we've shown in society, as Victoria said, the internet has the huge capacity to enable people to learn, reflect, and change without the intervention of something more formal. So actually, raising the awareness and driving conversation about things like menopause and all the other facets of the human experience that aren't covered in the workplace is probably going to achieve more balance and more change within organizations. So it's kind of just deploying the right resource at the right time rather than the wrong resource all of the time, which, like I say, is probably training is usually the answer, right?
And then not providing, you put some training in place and then you don't actually provide time then to follow that training up and make sure it's embedded. But you go, hey, we did it, we ticked a box and we did some training and woo, happy days.
Absolutely. And that's why I love what Victoria does, right? Because she spends the time to educate people on this stuff to a point where you're going to go, I have no other option now but to act differently as a result of this conversation, as a result of talking with Victoria. Because if I don't, well, what kind of a person does that make me? Makes me a pretty rubbish one to disregard the human experience of someone I either work with or eventually live with, you know? So, yeah.
No, I absolutely concur with that. And you know, I walk into my workplace tomorrow and you know, as head of school, somebody knocks on my door and then starts having this conversation, and you know, I would be a bit of a douchebag if I went, nah, go on, off you go, you know, on the back of some of the information that I've learned tonight, you know. So it is about that awareness, and it is about that, as you say, those open channels of communication, and that sense actually that conversation is okay. And going back to what Dave said, it's not necessarily a taboo topic anymore, and it's absolutely okay to have that open and honest conversation with employer/employee relations as such.
I think there's also a to take that one step further, is I'm thinking of my own organization. There's about 30 of us. I was just doing a quick count in my head. I think it's about a third female, 11 or 12 female across the business. You know, and there will be some of those that are in this perimenopausal or postmenopausal stage of their lives. I've just looked. We do have a menopause policy, but we do have a culture in our business where we are very open and people do talk to each other and are supportive about lots of things. I've only recently had a conversation with one member of staff. It wasn't about menopause, really about something that's quite personal to them that they felt quite embarrassed about. And I've been working with them to get them to talk about that and open up about it, because it's going to help them and help everybody around them. And menopause is another thing like that. But I'm thinking, for me, what have I done, or what have we done internally to actually say that out loud about a specific thing of menopause? So we do talk about other stuff openly. And yes, we're very supportive by default. And yes, we have a policy on our system. But actually, if I or anyone said, look, let's just be aware of what this is. Let's be aware if we see it in our colleagues. It might not be easy for people to put their hand up and speak about it. So we can take them aside, particularly if you're perhaps a female. You take them aside and just say, hey, are you aware of this? Is that something you're aware of that's going on? And then we can do that support. Because if you just sit back and be passive, people may go through it on their own, and then you're not actually providing any support at all because you don't know about it.
But I think that you're absolutely right, Dave. But and I think that boils down to, you mentioned it, where there's the culture, and that boils down to the culture of your business and the culture of your company, in terms of what you're trying to promote is that culture of openness and awareness and improved knowledge. And there will be some organizations and companies, and I'm not saying that we work for any of these, but there'll be some that are quite closed to some of those conversations. And I think you're you're obviously doing the right thing, but that's almost driven from the employer. It comes from the top down, because I think the employers have to set that culture. Yes, the employees feel it, but it's like anything. We can do a separate podcast on organizational culture and stuff, but it's from the top down, and it's really important that the leaders of the organization and the leaders of the company drive that forward, so that then the employees that sit beneath them actually do feel comfortable in having those conversations. So it's all very well you saying, oh, we do this and we do this, but actually if that's not felt by the employees, it's all very well. And I know you don't do this, Dave, but say, oh, look, we've got a policy, it's on a paper. But actually, if that's not lived and breathed and felt every day, all day, it sort of becomes meaningless. So I think that whole organizational culture bit is absolutely significant in all the things we just said, raising awareness, raising knowledge, and all of that.
And I think, well, if you look at, I just saw a picture this evening before I jumped on, Arsenal at the Emirates give free tampons and sanitary pads in the toilets at the Emirates. So that 10 years ago just wasn't happening.
No.
To David's point, right? So there is the premise that the employer needs to do something, but a lot of this is also societal, right? As well, that we've got to push that conversation in society as well. So free tampons at a football stadium is great, but that was a societal push. I fail to believe that Arsenal, on their own volition, no disrespect to Arsenal, but because I'm a Norwich fan, but they wouldn't have done that on their own volition. They would have done that because of the societal change and the conversation and the swell that was probably happening mainly on social media. So there are these two factors at play, where an employer plays an extremely important role in driving the societal shift, and society plays an extremely important role in the workplace shift. And it just kind of is, which one are you going to be determined by? Are you going to determine it yourself, or wait to be determined, if that makes sense?
But I wonder whether or not, your huge organizations like Arsenal Football Club, and I wonder whether or not, as you've said there, is that they won't have made that decision just on a, we're going to do it. Look at us, and we're the flag bearers and the standard bearers. What would have happened is they would have had either various focus groups, or they would have had, or their board members, or whoever it was that makes that decision, would have been privy to conversations surrounding their local communities and their local area, and thought, actually, this is something that we can do. And then on the back of that, all of these people that go to the Emirates then go into their individual workplace and say, well, Arsenal provide this, and they provide this, and they do this. And all of a sudden, then those conversations then get disseminated into lots of other different workplaces ad infinitum. And all of a sudden, the awareness and the knowledge and everything then improves and increases. And that becomes an increase across the board, as opposed to, well, it's just Arsenal doing it as a standalone. You almost, you almost impact others to then do the same, and they do the same almost because they're shamed if they don't, if that makes sense. And it's that societal thing of following the leader almost, and be a shepherd, not a sheep, and be that standard bearer, and let others follow you and in the example that you set, rather than you waiting for somebody else to set the example and then you follow them.
So in that analogy, David is a shepherd and Victoria is the shepherd trainer. And
the chief shepherd.
Chief shepherd, David is also shepherd, because also knowing David's organization, right? Like the way they talk, amongst themselves is very commendable, because they do create that culture where it's easy to start that kind of thing. In some of those organizations that don't do that, have that openness, that cultural openness to begin with, this stuff is even harder to do. At least with David, you kind of got, openness there already. So it's like, okay, we're going to drop something else into that. But other organizations need to radically adapt. And to David's point, it can't be just a policy, because we've got age, race, gender discrimination policies. And in some organizations, that hasn't really changed anything anyway. It just helps us form what tribunals we slap on people, rather than how do we create that systemic change where there is gender equality, there is race equality, there is sexuality equality, all this kind of stuff, right? It's
Yeah. And what I've seen with the, corporate work that I do, a lot of the work I get is from someone seeing that I've did work for X organization, and then, oh, you did work for so and so, I know them, would really like you to come and do some work for us. And I've been really lucky with all the companies that I've worked with. They all want to help their staff, and I go in and I can see what wonderful culture that they have in these workplaces. They want to do the best for all of their workforce well-being, so they have lots of different things in place. So these things can help everybody, not just people going through the menopause. And I think that's a really good take on it. One company I did managers training for, really good, as you were saying, top-down learning, top-down support. They had me back to do an on-site menopause clinic for their staff. And again, it demonstrates to their staff that they are actually valued, that they're not having to go somewhere else, they're not having to go and pay to see someone privately, that they're doing this for them. And it does help keep people in the workplace. Another company I did some champion training for, you would always talk about, so what are you going to do, how are you going to keep this visible, how are you going to keep the momentum going? And they set up like a menopause group, and they did that. The launch of that was so exciting. They put chocolate bars on everybody's table with an invite. So when they went into work that day, and a bit like Charlie in the Chocolate Factory, isn't it, with your gold ticket. But I thought that was a really good draw. And when they had me at the start of that, and we had so many people join that, and it was such a support to that organization. And it's just really heartwarming to know that so many organizations do have that culture in place.
Yeah, and I think it's very easy to get caught up, maybe, I suppose, more in the operational, how are we going to do it, what we're going to do, without really thinking of what we were classing in the education sector as like the strategic as to why. So why are we doing this? What are the intrinsic benefits of us doing this? Why are we doing it in the first place? What is the impact that we hope to gain from this? And that's a very strategic level conversation and thinking. And once you've got that clear in your mind, then you can start to drill down to more of the operational thing. Okay, day to day, what does that look like? How are we going to do this? Do we do this for the staff? Do we do that for the staff? How do we provide all the things that we know that we need to, but without understanding that, almost that strategic decision of why are we doing this? What are the intrinsic benefits that we want to see in us doing this? It then becomes very difficult almost to sell that. So it's really important that you start with we're doing this for this reason.
Well, and that's the interesting point, right? Let's just talk business for a second, in that every company pretty much exists to create value for either its shareholders, its owner. It exists to create money. So if you treat people better, and therefore they are more engaged and perform more, the company makes more money. So it's like, I don't want to be all capitalist about it, but its root, that's kind of why you're doing it. Now, of course, there are other reasons you should be doing it, societal reasons, cultural reasons to make that better. But what I've been able to demonstrate over the past couple of months is that if you do invest in this stuff, your company performs better. So it's like, I get all the other stuff, and and I have been banging on about this for the past year, trying to go, just treat people better and your company will be better. No one buys that. Not many people buy that anyway.
Yeah.
But if you can put it in cold hard fact to say treating people better generates more revenue and more profitability for your organization, then people are interested. Unfortunately, that's just the way the world works.
Yeah.
That is unfortunate, because there's some things that, as running an organization, you should just do because it's the right thing to do. And it is, and I understand it when you're responsible for the P&L and the balance sheet. I understand it, but sometimes you should just do what's right. And as you've just said, Toby, actually, that almost always brings benefit to the company anyway. You don't have to spend an awful lot of time trying to demonstrate the return on investment of educating people about any of these things, whether it be menopause support or anything else. Is the right thing to do. Just believe that the benefits will flow from that, and just do it.
And I think this is where startups particularly benefit, right? And I know we're straying off topic, but startups, when they have like not 0 people, but like 1 or 2 to 10, startup with 0 people isn't a startup, it's a nothing. But companies of 1 to 2 people to 10, they generally don't have this problem because they're all so close. There is only so many points of communication in there that mean everybody pretty much knows everything that's happening with that company, menopause or anything else related to that organization. As soon as you start going beyond that point, you kind of start losing control and have little pockets of communication and awareness and understanding. And that's where it becomes more difficult, right? So it's to reflect on that as either a company leader or whatever, that is more difficult. But you have to be able to disseminate that vibe through your other leaders that work with you and all that kind of stuff. And then you get to company of 9,000, let's say, and then you kind of go, crikey, how are we gonna retrofit this into our organization? That's incredibly hard. Doing it from the start and building it and continuing it, fine. Some don't do it though, but to retrofit it, I kind of kick the tires and look at the plumbing under the sink and take a sharp intake of breath and kind of go, it's going to cost you a lot of money, but ultimately it's worth it.
Well, first of all, I have to say I never expected to be hearing tonight how Arsenal Football Club are at the forefront of things, as always, as an Arsenal fan, Toby, I should mention. But just to get back, because we're coming close to the hour mark now, I want to take it back a little bit to the personal level. So there's going to be people out there, you know, and it's wonderful as we've heard it here from sort of the business aspect, but from a personal level, if you wanted to get some information about the things that are affecting you, Victoria, I'd be curious to know where you would recommend that those people go to. And then after that, Toby, Dave, Gaz, feel free to chime in. If you are one of those folks out there who are working for a company and you want to open that conversation because you don't think your company is doing enough about it, how does that happen? How do we make that happen? But Victoria, I'd like to hear from you first. Sorry.
Okay, so if anyone's wondering if they're perimenopausal and they're concerned and they're, worried, have a look at the Women's Health Concern website. As I said before, there's a plethora of fact sheets. They're all evidence-based, safe information. You know that is safe information. Don't go Googling because you may go down a rabbit hole and have unsafe information. If you're going to see someone in primary care, when you're making an appointment, I recommend asking for an appointment with the clinician that knows most about the menopause, because the stats are something like people go 6 times before they're given the right support, and that can take a couple of years. So, and that way you're going to see the right person sooner on, hopefully, to help you, listen to you, and support you through your menopause journey. So, yeah, from a personal level, keep it short. They're the best things to do. Keep it safe.
Cool. And what about you guys then? So you've got an employee who's not convinced that the policies are right or in place, and they're not even sure how to have that conversation. What would be your best advice for them? And I'm putting you on the spot here because I know you guys aren't expert in this field, but you guys are pretty good at giving advice, I reckon.
Well, for me, if you were an employee and you had these concerns, it's without every organization is different, and the dynamics of how those organizations and employees communicate varies wildly. And it's not necessarily the size of the company, because even big companies have, departments and then teams and then smaller teams within there. The first thing I would suggest is to speak to a colleague, any colleague that you actually get on with and can talk to, because that's the starting point where you can open the conversation. And then you've got 2 or 3 people that are thinking about that and they're thinking about the options available. And if they can't provide the support, and you don't already have, either health and wellbeing champions or specific menopause champions, and that's not a specific signposted thing, then you would normally, depends on your management structure again, but if you've got a management team that's very supportive and is open to these kind of conversations, you basically just go through those channels. If you don't think you have, then you're going to end up going down the HR route, I guess, if you actually need some actual support that you can't get from anywhere else.
That's some good advice.
Yeah, no, I would say something similar. I mean, again, it's really hard to talk from an organizational point of view, because probably myself, Toby, and Dave all work, and yourself all work for organizations maybe of different sizes and have different structures. But one of the things that certainly within education, you would have a line management system, so that you would have your line manager that is there to be the sounding board. But I would agree with Dave really initially, is talk to a colleague, start that conversation. If it is then something that you feel as though, not formalize as such, but you feel as though you would need the organizational support of, then particularly from an education point of view, it might be that you go down either the line management route, or as Dave said, you might go directly if you've got a HR representative or something like that. It might be that if you've got a I don't know, like a quick line to like occupational health or something like that, it might be something that you can go down quite quickly. The last thing that you want, though, is to be caught up within the bureaucracy of that organizational chain, for want of a better phrase, and then it takes time in order to affect a change. I think what we're all saying is that once there's that recognition that actually what we need those conversations to happen quite quickly, and therefore we need that to be quite impactful, and therefore we need solutions to be put in place quite quickly.
Indeed. Toby, do you have any final thoughts on that one?
I agree with everything that everybody said. The only thing I'll add is that if you practice human-centered design in the same way products and service teams design stuff for their customers, if you took that approach and started designing stuff for your employees, you design it completely differently. To Victoria's point, you wouldn't just make a policy, you would create the systems and frameworks in that organization for the conversation to happen. But most of that stems off what everyone said, is that it starts with talking to people, not only just having the conversation, but providing that system and framework as a company to make sure that the conversation around menopause and other conversations happen. And therefore, the pains and gains anyone feels in any certain situation, whether that's moving house, whether that's have a child, whether it's menopause, all these factors in life impact how we show up at work. So only by understanding your people are you going to be able to design a better environment for them.
That's a nice tagline to finish it on. That is, Toby. Thank you very much. So we're here, we're at the end of the episode now. We always try to wrap things up round about the hour mark. So, Victoria, if you want to give us a final thought and say your goodbyes to our listeners, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Thanks for having the opportunity to talk about menopause. And yeah, please don't feel alone. If you start feeling different and you think that you're going crazy, you're not. Please get the right support and you'll get back on track. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and there is a huge amount of support out there. It's just knowing how to get that.
Yeah, that's great. And listen, if anybody's listening to this episode and they want that support and they're not sure where to turn, feel free to drop us an email. There's nothing we can do, I can promise you that, but I can put you in touch with Victoria, who will be able to do a lot more than us. I can promise you that. Toby, give us your final thought and say your goodbyes to our listeners.
Oh, it's been a pleasure to be on the podcast again, chaps. Really appreciate it. And my final thought is kind of just going to echo what Victoria said. If you have anything, regardless if you're going through the menopause, you know someone who's going through the menopause, you employ people who are going through the menopause, or even if you just know a woman, full stop, I would probably talk to Victoria to understand what they are going through, have gone through, or probably will go through at some point in their lives, because pretty much you are going to know someone that's going to go through it, so it's probably worth knowing.
Yeah, 100%. And I think when you pitched this idea, that was kind of sort of resonated with me. At some point, my wife's going to go through this. I'm going to have a little bit of knowledge about how I can assist her. Don't get me wrong, I fail to assist her on a daily basis, but that's just that's the role of a husband. But I try my best, always in the wrong direction. Dave, give us your final thoughts and say your farewell.
Well, Victoria and Toby have kind of covered off the aspect from the individual, I guess, but from an employer's perspective, it's been very useful for me because, as I said, we have that policy. We have a very open culture within our business, but actually it's just given me that nudge to make sure that I'm more vocal, that this is something that we should be aware of. There is support and people should talk about it at the earliest opportunity, because it might be happening. People might not even realize it's happening. And just like lots of other things that people have going on in their lives, it's something that should be supported.
100%. Gaza?
Yeah, fascinating episode. Loved it. Very educational. I said at the start I hoped it was going to be, and it has been. There aren't many podcasts that we do of this ilk in terms of sort of raising awareness where you think actually that probably is going to impact me personally or my immediate family. And this episode absolutely is one of them. Toby, you hit the nail on the head. You are definitely going to know somebody very, very close to you that is going to go through this. So the more that you can gen up yourself, the more that you can raise awareness amongst others, it can only be a good thing. So I made a little bit of a joke earlier, it's good to talk, but absolutely it's good to talk. And I think we should encourage people to do that. And I just want to thank Victoria and thank Toby for guesting on our podcast. As I say, massively educational, hugely insightful. And I just hope that for the listeners out there that even if it's just one or two people that have been signposted towards opening that conversation, starting that conversation, having an understanding of where they can go for support, that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, 100%, dude. And to be honest with you, I'm one of those folks who prides myself on being one of the approachable members of the management team, and I think that's really, really important to me. And to have that little bit of knowledge to back that up that I've gained tonight, and from the research that I've been forced to do, you know what I mean? So I wouldn't have done it without it.
Because absolutely, yeah.
So, I'm hoping that, that I can hopefully benefit people, because I do have these conversations with people who work. We do, and I have had conversations with people about the menopause in the past, but it's come from a point, if I'm going to be really honest, of sheer ignorance on my behalf. So I think this has been beneficial. And if you listen to this out there and it's been a benefit to you, then God bless you. I hope it's been useful. But we will be back next week. We will be talking about something entirely different, as we always do. Next week, we're going to be looking at sobriety. Again, a topic that we know very little about, but we will approach that with the bluster that we do regardless. So we will say good night, and we'll catch you again next week, folks.